we said. Okay. So I think a better strategy is to go into spiritual direction, which is this week's, and then the rest of the slides are self-explanatory. If you want us to go through any of them tonight, we can. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to move to second week, which is what is spiritual direction? What is irshad? What is that process? So I want you to start helping me out. If you can reflect on your experience of spiritual direction as somebody who's received it, can you help me reflect on what that experience was like for you? Give me some of your reflection. What was it like? Did you go in having a specific question when you asked for some spiritual guidance, or was it generic? Did you choose the director, the person? What was that process like, choosing the person to speak with? How did it feel for you throughout the process and after the process? Did you feel in the end that you ended up with a direction, or more confused, or no direction but more questions? What was it for you? What was it like for you as a receiver? Yes.
And I might not answer the exact questions that you're saying. I'm just want to say that, for example, my father of confession is one of the best speakers in the whole Coptic church. And I don't remember his sermons. I remember the times that I needed to sit with him and he gave me spiritual direction. And this had a great influence on me. I would say spiritual direction is deeper and has an impact much more, in my point of view, than the generic, talks to everyone.
So you felt, again, we're talking about ministry has three modes: the word, liturgy, and spiritual direction. Your experience of that spiritual direction left you with something like clarity. What was it? What is it that it left you with? You said it was
It's
deep.
customized to my situation. Okay. And
what did it add to you? What did it give to you? What did you end up having?
If I have a specific spiritual exercise to do, and can follow up with my father of confession every now and then on it, that is really beneficial, more than just listening to generic, stuff.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else want to share their experience being directed or receiving guidance? What was it like for you? How did it work? Was it on the back of a problem? Was it on the back of a crisis? Was it on the back of a question or a confusion? Thank you.
And it was a decision I had to make, and I prayed. I prayed for the right decision, but I didn't feel like I'm leaning towards a certain direction. So I kept praying again, asking a lot of people, asking my father of confession. Actually, everybody was kind of was moving me in a certain direction, including my father of confession. I did not listen to anyone. I went in the opposite direction. But it was the right decision, I think, because...
So your experience was, I needed to take a decision, and I wanted some guidance or confirmation.
Yeah, so it's usually the inner voice. Like, I felt like, okay, even though everybody is pushing me in a certain direction, that's not what I'm comfortable with.
Okay, so your experience is after you sat with the person who gave you direction, you did the opposite. Okay? Yeah. Well, the reason we're asking the question is exactly these variances, is that we will realize that we don't have any clear process in mind as such. It's situation dependent, decision dependent, life crisis dependent, and your approach was, I ended up getting some exercises, some things to do. So this is how I used the direction. Any other experience? I'm sure you all had some experience.
I can share something. I think not something specific, but I think it's something that repeated a few times every time I had to make a decision. And it wasn't just a single person. I think it started with my father's confession. but it's almost like pieces of puzzles where my father first said something, and then some people I trust said something that were godly. So it's almost like everything fit together, and it helped me make a decision.
So
So we're just
it wasn't like go this way, but it gives some light from a perspective, and you had other pieces, and then you put all together, and then you ended up with like a final shape to you.
the different perspectives, different ways of going about something.
Okay.
So I find that's helpful.
Amazing. Thank you. Anything else?
Uh, Not my father of confession, but my spiritual father is different. He asked me, or he showed me many things in my personality, and he asked me to do things where no one else touched it, no one else ever in my life, and was totally weird to me and totally difficult to follow. But I felt peace in my heart, although it's very difficult to do, but peace in my heart that this is the voice of God.
Okay. So you felt that contrary to the usual advice, there was a particular sort of uniqueness to the stuff that he told you to follow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've chosen a passage. Thank you all, of course, because again we're highlighting the perspectives that we have. Chosen a very simple and straightforward passage from a book, "If You Love Me" by Father Matthew Poor. Let's go through it, Kara. He's basically making a distinction between two things. One is the first is a teacher, and the second is a spiritual servant. And it has to be clear in our mind. He's basically saying in the red, the first, the teacher, relays information. The second builds souls. The first extracts knowledge from books, places it before the student on paper. The second feeds. Feeds reminds us of what the Lord said to which disciple? St. Peter, when he said, feed or tend my sheep. Feed, tend. So the second, the spiritual servant, feeds the ones he serves from his own fullness, and he shares the inner riches of his own faith, his love, his self-sacrifice, and his humility. This is a big distinction between a teacher who knows the way, who knows what to say, who has the experience, and a spiritual servant who is sharing from their own fullness, humility, self-sacrifice, and their own love. In red as well, the first transmits words and concepts. Sometimes that's what we do in teaching, in using the ministry of the word. You stand up, for example, I give you a concept, you absorb it, you think about it. But the spiritual servant doesn't give you a concept. Full stop. That's not what they do. What do they do? The second brings forth words and concepts from within. So they have actually absorbed and lived and giving you the concepts from inside. You see the difference? You agree? Okay. And then the book continues to say, but there's also a difference between a student who's coming and sitting, waiting for some instruction, and a disciple who's an obedient servant who's come with the heart of, I want to obey, I want to follow the way, I want to see your experience, I want to absorb from your experience, not from your intellect, not from your smart words, not from your concepts only, but from your life. So in red, the obedient servant who places his hand into the hand of his spiritual guide and follows his counsel with reverence. While the first one increases in knowledge, the second one increases in grace and humility every day. So how do I know that I'm actually that type of student following that type of a spiritual director? Because I'm increasing in grace and humility. When you see grace and humility, remember John the Baptist, when he says he must increase and I decrease. Humility, I decrease, his grace is increasing in me. Why is this pivotal? Because sometimes I am following a spiritual director, but what I am getting, I'm not saying is it my fault or their fault, what I am getting from the process, or what is the process for me, is a process of teaching. Learning concepts, learning how to think, but not actually that type of life that we are meant to receive in a spiritual direction. This is important for us in both ways, as servants and as recipients of spiritual direction. This concept is not new, as we see in the New Testament. The idea of being instructed and taught, as you see in Psalm 32, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will guide you with my eye. So it's no longer just giving you some understanding and wisdom external from God. I will guide you with my eye. So my life is in you. And again, another verse from Isaiah 58, the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought, strengthen your bones. So the process of the counsel here is not just guiding as in go this way, come this way, avoid this, be careful, be cautious, just a process of giving advice. When you look at this, you will see no, but actually he satisfies your soul inside when you're in drought. It strengthens your bones. You shall be like a garden. So you see the process has more of a transmission of life rather than transmission of knowledge. As we'll see in the next couple of slides, the process is called transformation, not transmission. Transformation in Greek is metamorpho. Meta as in change, morpho is the morphology. So after some years of spiritual direction, you see that your morphology is changing, your shape is changing, your mind is changing. Okay? Another verse from the Old Testament, the Spirit of the Lord is a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel. Okay, let's keep going. In the Eastern Christianity, you will see that the concept of having a father, an elder, is very well known. Iatros pneumatikos, the spiritual physician. So they weren't just called Abba or Tamav, but they were called Iatros pneumatikos, or spiritual physician. Here is a word from the book of the Desert of the Fathers. The fathers of old went into the desert, and when they were made whole, they became physicians, and returning again, they made others whole. Therefore it said, physician, heal yourself. Because they were made whole by Christ, then they led others as physicians too. Are you following? Have I lost anybody? Okay. We'll pause for comments and questions in a minute. I can skip this one. This is from a chapter from a book that I will share with you. It's called Inner Way. It's a very old book by Joseph Allen. It says here, a process whereby one individual, the director, is welcomed into the life story of another. So the process of spiritual direction is I am welcoming you as my director into my story of life, with humility to have your input into my story, to help me see my story, help me absorb my story, help me have a different perspective on my life story. The past, the present, and future of my story. Let's keep going. It says the directee, the person who receives, enters a relationship of trust with his director or her director. And the latter agrees to walk with the person on his or her faith journey through life. It's a relationship, it's a story, are the words here. The words that we don't often see in that connection. As we've seen in the question when I asked you, sometimes it's all about that I want a decision. I need a spiritual father or mother or servant to help me with a decision. See how much we've reduced the spiritual direction to a question about a decision, and that's it, that the relationship is over, or at least on hold, until I face another crisis or decision, and then come, I need your help, I need your guidance. It seems that our fathers had a different perspective on spiritual counseling or direction. Let's keep going. In counseling or psychology, as you know, lots of types of therapies have come up. Cognitive therapy, analytic therapy, dynamic therapy, EMDR, or you name it. But there's one very famous one called narrative therapy, where the therapist would sit with the person or the counselee and help them rewrite their life story again after they have been through a lot. Pause, let's rewrite your life story. You are the author and you're trying to rewrite the story. Slightly similarly here, let's see. seen this way, the director is like a literary critic who, through a relationship of intimacy and trust, helps the other Christian, the directee, to write their own life story, but with God's grace. So my story is I see my past as hindrance. I see my present as crippling. I see my future as uncertain. My spiritual director helps me rewrite the exact same story with the same events, but with the grace of God. So I am now seeing my past as something I'm thankful for. It was painful, but I can now see it differently. And I see my present with all the people who are actually triggering me, people who are maybe putting pressure on me. I'm rewriting that with a different lens. Who helped me do that? The spiritual director. Helped me actually rewrite the story, but with the grace of God. So that's a very effective way of therapy because we're all stuck in certain events that happen to us and things that we're going through, and we see them one way. And we feel that things are imposed on us and we are passive in this process. The rewriting allows us to be more active in the process of understanding our life.
Is it actual writing?
In that type of therapy narrative,
Both?
in the type of therapy narrative, yes, it's actually writing. But from a church perspective, you don't have to. But we have some church fathers with the spiritual direction. They paused and they actually wrote a book about their life story, inspired by the attempt to revisit their life story, but from a different angle, with help of the grace. And you will see that in some books when they tell us about the story of pain, but they see it differently now. So that's the role of a spiritual direction.
I believe that the Bible is the best cognitive therapist you might ever see.
Yeah. So cognitive therapy, again, we will touch on it in week 4 to see also how changing the mind through cognitive